Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named The Last Ship, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins somewhere in the Arctic Circle where an American missile destroyer is on a secret training mission. It is equipped with the Aegis combat system and Tomahawk cruise missiles, with a current crew of 217, plus 2 biologists who hitched a ride to study bird droppings in the Arctic. The ship has been at sea for 4 months under strict orders, maintaining the highest level of electromagnetic control and complete radio silence, with no contact with the outside world. After completing their final training exercise, Captain Chandler contacts the military to request their return, but his orders are extended, and he is told to maintain radio silence. At the same time, the 2 biologists studying bird droppings on a deserted island and the missile destroyer are simultaneously attacked by 5 Russian helicopters. The American crew tries to hail them on the radio, but the helicopters don't respond. The crew is baffled, thinking the Russians have unilaterally started a war. After shooting down all 5 helicopters, Chandler asks a barely breathing captive why they attacked. The captive says only one word: cure. Captain Chandler senses this must be related to the 2 biologists who caught a ride on his ship. Chandler takes the bird droppings to the wounded Dr. Scott. She tells him she's a researcher directly under the Department of Homeland Security and that he's not cleared for this information. Chandler retorts that if she doesn't explain everything, he'll throw her bird droppings into the sea. Scott reveals that a plague broke out in Egypt 7 months ago and was never contained. It has now spread globally. Vaccines developed by the CDC, WHO, and biologists worldwide using samples from patients have all failed. Their current method of finding the primordial strain of the virus in bird droppings is humanity's last hope. Chandler asks if she's succeeded. Scott says she won't know until she gets back to a lab, and with the pandemic worsening, they need to hurry. When Chandler asks how she knows about the situation, Scott admits she has a satellite phone. Chandler is furious, realizing that's how the Russians found them. He tells her she's been gambling with their lives. He also questions why a mission to save the world would only have 2 people assigned to it, sarcastically asking if the budget was too tight. Scott explains that when she first proposed digging through bird droppings, everyone laughed at her smelly bullshit. It took over a month of persuasion before the government agreed to let her go, so getting 2 people was already a victory. Chandler returns the samples to Scott and goes to have a video chat with the president. When he gets to the screen, he's surprised to see a woman he doesn't recognize. She apologizes and introduces herself as the Speaker of the House. The president and vice president have both died from the virus. The entire White House staff is now working underground, and communications are spotty. She tells him to cut to the chase. They need to take the strain to a biolab off the coast of North Carolina. Chandler informs her that they were just fired upon by the Russian military. The speaker replies that Russia no longer has a government, and there's no telling who those forces were. When Chandler asks about his wife and children, she says she has no information and tells him to just get back as soon as possible. Once communications are restored and the crew has seen the news, XO Mike tells Chandler that their secret mission was nothing but a cover. Chandler says there's a refueling station in France and they'll head there first. Mike asks how they'll explain this to the crew, and Chandler decides to tell them the truth. He then addresses the entire crew, informing them of the situation and lifting the radio silence, turning on all communication devices. Chandler's biggest worry is his wife and kids, but he can't get through on the phone. Not only can't he, but Lieutenant Alicia comes to tell him that she's getting no response from the French Navy, and her own calls aren't connecting either. Only 4 people on the entire ship managed to get through, and all of them received bad news. Just then, Mike walks up and tells Chandler that his son is dead, but the rest of his family is okay. At that moment, radar detects an unidentified missile with a nuclear warhead. Chandler and his crew are terrified, thinking someone is willing to use a nuke on them just for some bird droppings. The missile flies over the missile destroyer and strikes France, completely destroying it. In an instant, a fireball erupts, and the electromagnetic pulse from the nuclear blast disables all of the missile destroyer's power and communication systems. After some quick repairs, going to France is no longer an option, and finding fuel becomes a problem. Just then, radar spots a vessel. Chandler decides to try their luck. As they get closer, they see it's an Italian cruise liner, but there's no response to their radio calls. The crew dons protective suits to board the ship to siphon fuel and find food. Once aboard, the soldiers witness the true horror of the plague for the first time. Everyone on the ship is dead, and the cold storage is filled with bodies. Then a soldier accidentally knocks off his helmet and gets splattered with blood coughed up by a corpse. Fearing he will infect everyone, the soldier ignores their pleas, pulls out his pistol, and kills himself. Dr. Scott tells Chandler that from the blood she drew from a patient on the cruise ship, she's found a new variant of the virus. A particular gene sequence seems to have been artificially inserted, which is why the virus is spreading so rapidly. Chandler asks if this means it's a bioweapon. Scott says it probably is, but there's a silver lining. This inserted gene has prevented the virus from mutating quickly, making her more confident that she can develop a vaccine. When Chandler questions how she can succeed where so many other scientists have failed, Scott explains that it's because she's the only one with the primordial strain and knows exactly how the virus has changed. Just as they repair their communication equipment, they receive a message from the U.S. military telling them not to go to North Carolina as it's no longer safe. They are redirected to Mayport Naval Station, but the message is 5 days old and they can't re-establish contact. Calls to the president also go unanswered. Along with the new orders, they receive a video file. It's Chandler's wife, who says they are okay for now and are taking shelter at his father's cabin in the woods. The missile destroyer arrives in the waters near Mayport. Chandler doesn't rush into port. He first checks the radiation levels, which seem to indicate no nuclear detonation has occurred. He then asks Dr. Scott if it's possible to create the vaccine on the ship. Afterward, he calls in his XO to discuss the situation. He points out that they can't contact the president, the naval base, the lab, or even pick up any civilian broadcasts. Mike suggests the power grid must be down, and without electricity, everything stops. He thinks they should go ashore to see what's happening. Chandler disagrees, saying they won't be going back for now. When Mike asks why, Chandler explains that the lab is 200 miles inland, a journey fraught with danger. Mike argues they can fight their way through, but Chandler counters, saying if there's no power and no supplies, even having the lab would be useless. He adds that he just confirmed with Scott that the vaccine can be made on the ship. Mike insists they are under orders and must obey the president. Chandler reminds him those orders are 5 days old. Mike argues that everyone just wants to go home. Chandler challenges him, asking who he would let go. They have 216 people and only 80 protective suits. Mike suggests drawing lots, saying he'd rather die a free man than live as a prisoner of hope. Chandler cuts him off, saying he's not debating this with Mike and he needs Mike to remember who the captain is. Chandler then orders the ship to accelerate away from the coast and addresses the crew over the broadcast system. He tells them they have lost contact with the government and that the United States has likely fallen. They are no longer the U.S. Navy. They are now humanity's Navy. Their mission is no longer just to save America, but all of humankind. Their current task is to protect Dr. Scott so she can develop the vaccine as soon as possible. The hope of the entire human race rests on their shoulders. He asks everyone to put aside their personal feelings for now. They must find a way to survive at sea. Their next stop is Guantanamo Bay for fuel. He thanks them and orders full speed ahead. After his speech, the crew salutes him in a sign of agreement. The ship hasn't gone far when Dr. Scott's assistant, Quincy, secretly makes a satellite phone call. Speaking in Russian, he says the ship did not make landfall and he's awaiting further instructions. The spy, Quincy, reports to his superiors that the ship is heading to Guantanamo and they instruct him to find a way to slow them down. Just then, Dr. Scott enters. Quincy tells her she shouldn't do everything herself and should let him help more. In reality, he's looking for an opportunity to sabotage their work. Scott says she'll consider it. Since the warship was previously on a maritime mission, it has only a small contingent of Marines. The sailors have little experience in land combat. With the situation on shore unknown and likely dangerous, the Marine leader, Lieutenant Green, is tasked with giving the sailors some basic landing operation training. Among the sailors is a scatterbrained recruit who keeps pointing his rifle at his teammates' heads, much to the displeasure of his squad leader, Burke. With their country and the entire world gone, everyone is feeling anxious. The communications soldiers are under immense pressure, constantly monitoring distress calls from all over the world. People crying for their parents, saying their sons are starving, or broadcasting addresses and pleading for rescue. Listening to this has left the soldiers on the verge of depression. Lieutenant Alicia tells everyone that no matter what they hear, they must not respond. They cannot emit any signals right now. Their position must remain top secret. A sidekick lieutenant who comes to relieve her asks if a Russian ship is chasing them and if the nuke a few days ago was aimed at them. Alicia tells him he should know better than to ask if there's a Russian ship and warns him not to spread rumors. She says in times like these, rumors are more dangerous than the virus. She reminds him that this room is off limits to others and they should know better. It's not just the comms team. The entire crew is under various psychological pressures. Command Master Chief holds a group group memorial service on the deck, where crew members share their stories of loss. Families have been torn apart and relatives have died. This is where the role of religion becomes apparent. One sailor speaks up, saying he believes they were chosen by God to survive the plague. Master Chief seizes the moment with an amen, and the crew echoes him. That single word probably gives them enough strength to last for half a month. Dr. Scott educates the crew about the virus. She explains it's airborne, and after infection, symptoms include coughing and lethargy, followed by skin ulcerations, and finally, the body essentially ruptures, leading to death by blood loss. The manner of death is gruesome. Dogs are immune, and while other animals can get sick, they don't directly transmit it to humans. Protective suits are necessary indoors if the virus is present, but it's generally safe in well-ventilated outdoor areas. The incubation period is 3 to 5 days, according to the latest report from the CDC. At this point, XO Mike starts causing trouble, questioning how old her information is. Scott says it was the latest update from 3 weeks ago. Mike presses, asking how she can be sure the virus hasn't mutated further and what would happen if something went wrong. Scott declares that if anything happens, it's on her. Seeing the tension, Captain Chandler pulls Mike aside for a private chat. He asks him what his problem is, pointing out that, as a leader, questioning the scientist in front of everyone could easily cause a panic. He says he understands Mike's frustration, given that she lied to them for 4 months. Mike retorts that she was able to call her family every day while they didn't even have a chance to warn theirs, asking how that's fair. Chandler tells him to let it go, given the circumstances, but Mike says he doesn't trust her. Chandler asks if he still trusts him. He points out that with America and the Navy gone, they have nowhere to go. He asks if Mike will still follow his orders when they disagree. Mike confirms he will, but asks if Chandler really thinks Dr. Scott can do it. Chandler replies that they have no other choice. As they speak, they arrive at Guantanamo Bay. A helicopter scout reveals that the base, which once housed 9,000 people, is now completely deserted, with no signs of life on thermal imaging. After studying the terrain, Chandler decides to split them into 3 teams. He will lead a team to the food warehouse, Chief Engineer will lead a team to get fuel, and Lieutenant Green will lead a team to the hospital for medical supplies and equipment. Dr. Scott also prepares to go ashore, but Chandler stops her, saying if she dies, they're all doomed. The spy Quincy tries to join to cause trouble, but Chandler refuses him too. Scott argues that Chandler, as the captain, shouldn't be going ashore. Chandler says if he dies, XO Mike will take his place. Scott replies that she doesn't think Mike is reliable. Chandler cuts her off, saying he doesn't need her opinion, he needs his own. The teams then land. Aboard the ship, Quincy attempts to sabotage things but is caught by the ship's doctor. On the island, things start off okay, aside from the scatterbrain accidentally firing his weapon and shattering a pane of glass. The teams head to their respective objectives. Chandler's team spots a suspicious jeep on the way to the food warehouse. Suddenly, a man runs out to flex his long hair, yelling and waving his hands for them to stop and get away from the vehicle. The jeep then explodes. Chandler reports the situation and everyone tenses up. The long-haired man walks over to introduce his name, Tex, and tells them not to shoot, that he's a friendly. He explains that the people who set the bomb are 14 former Al-Qaeda prisoners who were held at the base. They were all uninfected. He was part of a 6-man private security team left behind after the military abruptly pulled out. At first, they figured with the country gone, there was no point in holding terrorists, so they released the prisoners. But the prisoners betrayed their trust, launched a sneak attack, and now he's the only one left. When Chandler asks where they are now, Tex says that from what he's observed, most of them are guarding the food warehouse, and a few went to blow up their fuel tanker. Chandler immediately tells Mike to prepare for battle. Mike orders the fueling team to stop. As fate would have it, the valve is broken and won't close. The terrorists fire a rocket, which injures Chief Engineer's leg. Under Mike's command, the crew executes a series of slick, impressive maneuvers. Before the terrorists can even set up their RPG, a shell from the warship sends them flying like Barbie toys. Chandler has Tex lead the way to the warehouse. On the way, they see one of Tex's colleagues strung up, which enrages Tex. Chandler promises they'll make them pay. At the hospital, the team has gathered their supplies and is ready to leave, but they find the door locked from the outside. A barrage of gunfire follows, and the team's oxygen is running low. Mike wants to send reinforcements, but Lieutenant Green says he has a plan. Meanwhile, a firefight erupts in the warehouse. Green's team executes a feint, creating a diversion, and manages to break out just as their oxygen runs out. However, the scatterbrain is shot in the abdomen. Since the ship's doctor is already busy with the chief engineer, Dr. Scott volunteers to help. After a moment's thought, Mike allows her to go and treat the wounded. The battle in the warehouse continues. In the chaos, Tex makes a clean shot, saving Chandler's life. At first, Lieutenant Green doesn't trust Scott, but Scott, with her bold expertise, successfully removes the bullet and saves the scatterbrain's life. The fighting in the warehouse suddenly stops. The remaining 3 terrorists have captured Tex. Chandler opens a channel to Mike while negotiating with the terrorists. In reality, Chandler is secretly relaying his position to Mike during the negotiation, telling him to aim for the southwest corner of the warehouse. Mike and Chandler, clearly on the same wavelength, understand each other instantly. The negotiations predictably fail. Mike opens fire. In the ensuing explosion, Chandler, the Scatterbrain, and Burke simultaneously take out the last 3 terrorists. Tex is unharmed. The Scatterbrain performs well under pressure, not messing up at a critical moment. Hearing Chandler report target eliminated, Mike is relieved. Burke gives the Scatterbrain a nod of approval. Chandler tells Tex that based on his skills, he's clearly an experienced operator. In these trying times, they need good people, and he asks if Tex is interested in joining the Navy. Tex asks if he gets a free ride back to the States. Chandler assures him he does. Tex agrees to join. Chandler is thrilled to have gained a formidable new ally. The operation was a success, and everyone returns with a full load. XO Mike reports to Chandler that they have enough food to last 5 or 6 weeks, but the fuel pump was damaged, so the tanks are only 96% full. Chandler had planned to set sail at 1700, but Lieutenant Alicia reports that Quincy is insisting his equipment was knocked over and needs to be recalibrated, refusing to let them leave and asking for another 3 or 4 hours. Chandler doesn't think much of it and asks Mike where Dr. Scott is. Mike says she's with the wounded and that he had no choice but to let her go ashore to help. Just then, radar detects a ship. Chandler hails them on the radio. A woman's voice responds, claiming they are a British warship and providing detailed information. They say they have no infected crew members and are also looking for supplies. They're out of food, but have plenty of alcohol. After cross-referencing, the ship's information checks out. Chandler lets down his guard and welcomes them, saying they have the food ready to share. Chandler then goes to visit the wounded. The crew, who had previously seen Scott as a liar, now view her in a much better light after this operation. The Scatterbrain and Burke have also become friends. As the British ship approaches, Chandler and Mike are eagerly awaiting some beer, but Lieutenant Alicia reports that the Aegis system cannot confirm the other ship's electronic beacon. It doesn't look like a British vessel. Chandler takes a closer look and realizes it's a Russian ship. He immediately orders the crew to battle stations. The other ship activates its fire control radar and locks onto the missile destroyer. A voice comes over the radio. It's the Russians. The voice asks if Chandler is there, then says, with no hard feelings, that he just wants to get something from their ship. Chandler asks them to identify themselves. The Russian responds that he is Admiral Ruskoff of the Russian Navy. This name startles Chandler, who quickly sends a subordinate to fetch a Russian language book from his shelf. Chandler warns Ruskoff that he is in American territorial waters and that he will open fire if Ruskoff doesn't withdraw beyond 12 nautical miles. Ruskoff dismisses this, saying he's been following them for half the globe and will get straight to the point. Give him the primordial strain and Dr. Scott and he'll let them go. Chandler pretends not to understand. Ruskoff tells him to stop playing dumb. America and its navy are gone. If he doesn't cooperate, Ruskoff will turn his ship into a spaceship riding a mushroom cloud. He tells them he was the one who nuked France, precisely to stop them from refueling. The book arrives soon, and Chandler's memory serves him right. The author is indeed Ruskoff. Chandler suggests a face-to-face meeting, and Ruskoff agrees. Chandler asks Dr. Scott how the Russians knew about the primordial strain. She has no idea, saying that the Russian scientists who knew about this line of research should all be dead. Chandler asks if they could also develop a vaccine if they had the strain. Scott says they probably could, just a bit slower than them. Chandler then asks Quincy to accompany him to meet Ruskoff. Chandler tells Mike that this Ruskoff is no ordinary man. He's a military genius who has written many books on military strategy, and Chandler himself is a fan. Ruskoff specializes in modern naval warfare. Against such a formidable opponent, Chandler decides to start with a verbal confrontation, which also gives him a chance to meet his idol. The two sides meet in a bar on the Guantanamo base, and their conversation unfolds in a tense atmosphere. Ruskoff says he had told Moscow that to survive the plague, they had to stay at sea, but they insisted the ships make port, so he took matters into his own hands, not following the orders of his superiors. Hearing this, Chandler feels a sense of kinship. It's as if great minds think alike. Ruskoff says he won't hide anything. Chandler is looking at the last admiral of the last warship in the Russian Navy. Their uniforms don't mean much anymore. Chandler disagrees, stating that they were born sailors of the United States and will die as ghosts of the United States. Ruskoff says it's good enough just to be alive and downs his drink. Chandler asks why he bombed France. Ruskoff replies that it was to prevent him from refueling there. Chandler says if he wanted the vaccine, he should have just asked, questioning if the US is that stingy. But Ruskoff tells him that in the last 4 months, the world hasn't just been dealing with a plague. Man-made disasters have been far worse than natural ones, and not everyone wants to be saved. He adds that what he's specifically doing is none of Chandler's business. Chandler admits they haven't developed the vaccine yet. Ruskoff says of course not, because without the raw materials he possesses, none of them can succeed. He tells him to cut the crap and hand over the strain and Dr. Scott. Chandler offers him the primordial strain, saying it's a gift, and they can go their separate ways. But Ruskoff insists he must have Dr. Scott as well. The spy Quincy offers himself instead, but Ruskoff says he only wants Scott. Chandler says that's definitely not happening. Ruskoff boasts that his warship can stay at sea for another 25 years. Chandler ends the conversation, telling Ruskoff he can feed his crew with his nuclear reactor then. He bets Ruskoff won't dare to bomb him since they control the port, and they'll see who can outlast whom. To show his resolve, Ruskoff shoots one of his own men on the spot, saying they now have one less mouth to feed. Everyone present is stunned. It's the kind of stunt a petty thug pulls to act tough. The meeting ends with both sides walking away in anger. The Russians lay a minefield at the harbor exit. Mike despairs, saying they're trapped. Chandler tells him not to panic. Their ship is more advanced, and they have the port. He sends men to find another suitable channel. Chandler then asks Dr. Scott about the raw material Ruskoff mentioned that only he possessed. Scott insists that Ruskoff is making it all up. Chandler tells her to get back to her work. After surveying, the navigator finds a narrow channel that warships used to use but was later abandoned. Tex says he knows that channel and a warship can't possibly get through it. Lieutenant Green suggests they should just fight it out. Chandler says they don't have enough firepower for a direct confrontation and asks what other weapons are on the base. Tex asks if he wants a tank, saying he has the keys. Chandler says even just some ammunition would be good. He first sends 2 frogmen on a submersible scooter to investigate the channel. They discover it's only blocked by some coral, which can be blown up. Just then, they are spotted by a Russian speedboat and killed. The entire crew of the missile destroyer is enraged. Chandler hails Ruskoff, tells him to watch his speedboat, and then fires a shot that blasts the men off the boat into the sea, but it's not fatal. Chandler says this is just a warning. Next time, he'll aim for the men. He tells Ruskoff he is being dishonorable. Ruskoff asks why he's so emotional, saying it's not how a leader should behave. Chandler then switches to Russian and launches a propaganda attack, saying Ruskoff isn't the leader he used to be. He's gone mad and is even killing his own men. He taunts Ruskoff, asking if he'll have to kill 2 more of his followers if Chandler doesn't obey. Ruskoff threatens to sink him. Chandler retorts that his ship is an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer and dares him to try, saying they'll see who sinks whom. He tells Ruskoff to back off his weapons and move his ship out of sight. Ruskoff agrees but gives him a 24-hour deadline to hand over Scott. Tex is unhappy, saying they should have just blown them out of the water. That night, the Russian spy Quincy suddenly abducts Dr. Scott, intending to hand her over to the Russians. Fortunately, he is spotted by the duty officer, and his plan is foiled. Chandler asks Scott about Quincy's situation, but she's just as confused, saying Quincy did an exchange program in Russia a decade ago. Mike personally interrogates Quincy, who claims he's helping Ruskoff because his wife and daughter have been captured and are on Ruskoff's ship. He says that when the plague began, the U.S. government ordered biologists to hide information and research about the virus from the world to create a monopoly. He felt this was wrong, that science should have no borders, so he secretly shared their findings with a Russian scientist. Chandler asks if the Russian scientist is on Ruskoff's ship. Quincy says no, the Russian scientist is dead. Ruskoff told him he killed the Russian scientist and then captured his wife and daughter. Mike asks if the woman who gave the false information was his wife. Quincy says it has nothing to do with her. She was forced. He says he'll do anything, just don't harm his family. Chandler asks what the plan was for tonight. Quincy explains that he was supposed to take Dr. Scott and the samples to the other side of the harbor, where a boat was waiting for him to take them to the Russian ship. Chandler decides to use this plan against them. He has his own crew members take take Quincy's place, sending the Russians a little local specialty from the base, explosives and artillery shells. While it doesn't sink the ship, it does kill over a dozen of Ruskoff's men. Meanwhile, Chandler's missile destroyer uses its stealth advantage and a simple strip of foil to simulate its radar signature, fooling the Russians. At the same time as the decoy boat explodes, they use a torpedo to blast open the coral in the channel, escaping Guantanamo Bay. On Ruskoff's ship, the crew is in chaos. Just as they catch their breath, a subordinate tells Ruskoff the weapon systems are still operational. Looking at the red dot on the radar created by the foil, Ruskoff says there's no point in firing. They're already gone. The crew members from the decoy boat are safely picked up, and the missile destroyer powers forward at full speed. Ruskoff goes down to a cabin and meets a scientist who is catching rats in a sealed compartment. All of Ruskoff's domineering presence is gone. The scientist asks if Scott didn't come. Ruskoff says she didn't. The scientist is annoyed, saying he thought the ship was going to sink during the explosion. Ruskoff reassures him that it can be repaired. The scientist says he only wants Scott and the strain. Ruskoff respectfully promises that he will get them. When Ruskoff offers to have men help the scientist clean up his scattered equipment, the scientist refuses. Then, the scientist leans over a captured rat and exhales on it with a twisted expression. Elsewhere, after escaping the clutches of Ruskoff, Chandler relaxes and starts thinking about his wife and kids. Chandler takes a shift in the comms room. Mike comes to see him and asks what he's up to. Chandler says his dad's cabin has a radio. Today is his wedding anniversary with his wife, and he wants to see if he can find her signal. Dr. Scott needs monkeys for her vaccine experiments, so their next destination is Costa Rica. Scott has made some progress, but the next step requires Quincy's help. After explaining the situation to Chandler, Scott goes to see Quincy, but he flatly refuses to help. Suddenly, disaster strikes. A generator overheats, causing a power outage that also affects Scott's lab. Misfortunes never come singly. Before they can even diagnose the specific fault, the overheating causes a fire. Chandler rushes to the scene. The chief engineer's assistant explains that the fire was caused by a damaged intake filter in the seawater processing system. Seaweed was sucked in, clogging the water cooling system's intake and causing the power system to overheat. Chandler figures the filter must have been scraped when they blew up the coral because the channel wasn't wide enough. The assistant says without the filtration system, they can't cool the power systems. 2 of the 3 generators were destroyed in the fire. Chandler orders all remaining power to be diverted to Scott's lab to maintain its low temperature. He tells Mike that the water purification system is down, so they'll have to ration water. Mike points out they're in the tropics with 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat every day and suggests they pull the guards from their posts. Chandler agrees and says there's another matter that Mike needs to handle personally. Mike then goes to the room where Quincy is being held. He tells Quincy that before he was an XO, he was a prison guard in a high-security facility, implying he knows all 18 forms of classic torture, from the tiger bench to chili water, and can be both hot and cold. Quincy says he's willing to go to the lab but demands to be allowed out for some sun every day and to have someone to play chess with. The assistant seeks help from the still recovering chief engineer, who tells him that he already knows everything she does. What he lacks now is confidence. The assistant reports his progress to Chandler, saying it will take about 10 days to fix the engine, and a complete repair will require them to dock and shut down the engines. Due to the lack of water cooling, for every hour the engine runs, it needs 5 hours to cool down. The situation is critical. They can't go to Costa Rica for now. They need to find a place to stop first. The navigator points to an island with fresh water, but with their limited power, it will take them about 6 days to get there. Chandler sends out a drone to see if they can find other ships. Mike warns that even with rationing, their fresh water will only last 4 days. If they don't reach the island in 6, they'll all be dead. The entire crew conserves water, collecting it from every possible source. Without power, the air conditioning is also off, adding insult to injury. In the lab, Quincy helps Dr. Scott complete her work. Meanwhile, Chandler is on the deck, looking at the stars and thinking of his wife and kids. Scott approaches with good news. She's developed a prototype vaccine, and they can begin testing. Chandler is overjoyed, but his happiness is short-lived as Scott's lab loses power again. This time it's a major problem. The last generator has failed and needs a replacement part, but they've run out of spares. Scott says without power, her vaccine and the virus strain will be destroyed if the temperature rises above 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Chandler says the engines can provide power when they're running, but Scott says getting power for only a short time every 6 hours is not enough. The assistant has a stroke of genius. They can throw it into the sea. Scott asks if that would work. Chandler thinks it should if it sinks to the bottom. Scott worries that the pressure will crush her test tubes, but Mike says they have the right equipment. Scott then points out that if they start the ship, the movement will drag the container up. They would have to remain stationary. Chandler says as long as the propellers can turn, their ship can generate electricity. The assistant asks how the propellers can turn without the engines. Chandler says they'll stop the ship first, put the container in the water, and he has a plan. Mike reminds him they have no water to drink, and the longer they wait, the more dangerous it gets. Chandler says the navigator checked the barometer and a low-pressure system is approaching from the northwest. With wind, they can succeed. Mike retorts that if the wind doesn't come, they'll all die. Fortunately, the vaccine is lowered to the seabed and the temperature is just right. The next morning, the sun is blazing and there isn't a breath of wind on the sea. Chandler gets antsy and goes to Master Chief for guidance. The Master Chief reassures him, saying he should trust himself and his decisions lately have been quite brilliant. The Master Chief then takes out his Bible and starts to pray. A miracle happens. The wind picks up. Chandler immediately orders the launch of parachutes. The oil-burning vessel never imagined it would one day become a new-energy sailing warship. Although Dr. Scott's lab power issue is solved, it's not a long-term solution, and the electricity generated isn't enough to produce fresh water. Because their journey has been delayed, the ship has been without fresh water for 2 days. The island is still nowhere in sight, and half the crew has collapsed from dehydration, turning into human jerky. Chandler feels extremely guilty, believing he has once again led everyone to their deaths. Just as he's on the brink of collapse, a few seagulls appear. That's right, seagulls mean an island is nearby. Chandler's plan has succeeded. The island is in sight. The crew then goes into vacation mode. Sun, sand, waves, a palm tree, and Chandler as their captain. The island has all the bottled water they could want. The assistant doesn't go on vacation. He stays behind to repair the ship. Chandler brings him some fruit from the island. Quincy also remains on the ship. A cook, the best chess player in the galley, is assigned to play chess with him, looking thoroughly unhappy about it. Chandler returns to the comms room. Scott finds him and thanks him for his support. Chandler says he had no choice. Scott disagrees, saying he's being modest. He had every opportunity to go ashore and go home, but he chose to stay for the country and its people, making him a great hero. Chandler tells her not to get ahead of herself. Going home is just a matter of time, and he always keeps his word. The ship is repaired and is now at full speed, riding the waves towards Costa Rica. Dr. Scott says there's a forest not far from the coast where they can find monkeys. That night, XO Mike knocks on Chandler's door again. He says that based on various radio intercepts, Costa Rica is in turmoil, and they might end up having to act as international police, which would be exciting but a waste of time. He checked with Scott, who said there's a nature preserve in the rainforests of Nicaragua that they can reach by taking a speedboat upriver. However, the distance is great, and they might lose contact with the warship. Scott insists on going because they won't be able to distinguish the type of ape she needs. Chandler asks if there are any people living there. Mike says there should only be a few researchers. Chandler decides Mike should go with him this time. They then set off in 2 speedboats. Chandler leads a team ashore to scout first, leaving Dr. Scott and 2 others behind to guard the boats. However, not long after entering the preserve, Chandler's team encounters a large group of infected people. This is much scarier than zombies. They can't shoot, so they can only retreat. The situation is dire. Chandler orders them to take Scott back to the ship first. They will go upstream to catch monkeys, and they'll just grab a few of each species they find. However, the distance is still too great, and Chandler's team loses contact with the missile destroyer. As they proceed, they discover a grounded yacht. They go ashore again, and not long after, the sidekick lieutenant steps on a trap. Chandler's team is then captured by a group of armed men and taken to a human settlement. The people here are all healthy, but the atmosphere is clearly tense. Chandler is brought before a man who is the leader of the area and a former drug lord. Chandler immediately lays his cards on the table, telling him he has a destroyer waiting offshore and that the drug lord shouldn't misjudge the situation. The drug lord asks what they're doing there. Chandler says they're looking for supplies. The drug lord, also wary, orders his men to treat the poisoned and injured sidekick lieutenant and then invites Chandler and Mike to a meal. The drug lord tells them that the grounded yacht was his. The other people were with a former mayor who was trying to escape when he ran into him. Chandler asks why the drug lord lives so well while the others live like beggars. The mayor explains that they are following ancient customs and traditions using a system of slavery. They provide labor for the drug lord, and in return, the drug lord provides them with protection. The drug lord adds that the only reason they're still alive is because of his guards and traps. Otherwise, the group of infected people from the coast would have overrun them. As they start to eat, the drug lord begins to harass a sexy woman who turns out to be the mayor's daughter. The girl becomes enraged and calls the drug lord a psychopath. She says her father is too afraid to speak up, but she isn't, and she pleads for the U.S. military to rescue them. The mayor is terrified. Chandler tells the drug lord they just want to leave safely and won't get involved in anything else. The drug lord then asks what the equipment on their boat is for, accusing Chandler of not telling him the truth. Chandler admits they're there to study the virus, believing monkeys are the hosts. The drug lord says they have plenty of monkeys. He asks how many they want, pointing to the meat they were just eating. Lieutenant Green and Mike go to get the monkeys. They see the mayor's daughter being taken to the other side of the river to fend for herself. A conflict breaks out, and Mike and Green are tied up. Chandler tries to use verbal attacks, but the drug lord doesn't give him a chance. He tells them to mind their own business and get out. He warns that if they try to attack his stronghold, all the civilians will die with them. He then grabs the mayor's other, younger daughter, intending to rape her. Chandler and his team are stripped of their gear and sent back on their boat. They don't get far before Mike can't take it anymore. He says he can tolerate a lot, but not the rape of a child, reminding Chandler that they both have daughters. After a moment's thought, Chandler says there are 13 guards in total, 7 around the drug lord and 4 in the village. Green adds that there are 2 more on patrol. The Master Chief argues that this isn't their business and they have no right to interfere in internal affairs. Besides, they're unarmed. This isn't a TV show where the protagonist's plot armor makes their muscles bulletproof. Mike and Chandler, unable to stand it, overrule him. Master Chief turns the boat around and heads back to the compound. By now, night has fallen, and the drug lord is about to assault the young girl. Chandler's team arrives, their plot armor activated. They are impervious to harm, taking out all the guards as if it were child's play without a single scratch. The drug lord makes it to the riverbank, and Chandler's team catches up. They take out his guards with 2 shots. The drug lord grabs the mayor's younger daughter as a hostage. Seeing no escape, he chooses to surrender, even asking Chandler to take him to the U.S. for trial. But the mayor, showing no honor, picks up a knife and stabs the drug lord repeatedly. Chandler hands over control of the stronghold to the mayor and leaves with the monkeys. On their way back, they see the horde of infected people again, a massive group. One can only imagine how long the mayor, without his guards and relying on the freedom and democracy left behind by the Americans, will last. After returning to the ship, Chandler and his team are in a somber mood. They witness the failure of democracy and the survival of tyranny. In truth, the only difference between their ship and the stronghold was that Chandler didn't prey on women. In the comms room, a communications officer tells Lieutenant Alicia that many people have been asking her for news from the outside world. Except for a few leaders and the comms team, the crew is largely unaware of the state of the world. Some soldiers don't even know why they launched the parachutes earlier. The scene shifts to Chandler, Mike, and the Master Chief eating together. Mike asks if they should tell the crew about the monkey-catching mission. The Master Chief thinks a brief summary would suffice. Chandler points out that they came back covered in blood. The Master Chief suggests they just say they encountered bad guys, defeated them, that justice triumphed over evil, and the oppressed villagers lived happily ever after. No infected, no leaving anyone to die. When Chandler questions if that will work, Mike agrees that parents don't need to tell their children everything. The Master Chief adds that he's already told everyone on the mission to keep it secret and will just need to inform the recovering sidekick lieutenant. Mike says this is standard military procedure, but Chandler argues this is different. They were lied to by their own government for 4 months, and the crew is now deeply distrustful of backroom dealings. He feels that lying to them again would be wrong. The Master Chief says he understands, but not everyone has the courage to face the harsh reality. Dr. Scott begins her experiments on the ship, and Chandler goes to check on her progress. Back on the bridge, Chandler starts to address the crew. The Master Chief specifically comes over to remind him to keep it brief, but Chandler instead delves into the details, trying to create an emotional connection. He tells them they encountered infected people but couldn't save them. However, he says, they captured 34 monkeys for Scott's experiments and they can finally go home. By the time they get there, the vaccine will be ready and they can save the world. Lieutenant Alicia is sharing his thoughts in their quarters. A sidekick girl comments on how gruesome the sidekick lieutenant's leg looks and says he won't talk about what happened. Alicia says the Master Chief has been grim-faced lately and she hasn't seen XO Mike all day. She asks the sidekick girl if she thinks Scott will really be able to create a vaccine, advising her to prepare for the worst. While sunbathing, Quincy asks the cook where they're heading next. The cook says they're going home, and if supplies hold up, it should take about 8 days. When Quincy tries to probe further, the cook tells him to stop prying, saying his final destination won't change no matter where they go. Dr. Scott's research is not going well. The monkeys are dying one by one. Chandler is frustrated irritated, reminding her of what he told the crew and saying it looks like she's in trouble. Scott retorts that she never said the vaccine would work on the first try. Chandler asks what to do with the dead monkeys. Scott says to just throw them into the sea. Chandler tells her to do it at night, out of sight, and if anyone asks, to say it's medical waste. Chandler consults with Mike and the Master Chief again. Mike is shocked that 6 died at once, questioning Scott's claim that she was close to success. The Master Chief points out that there are still 28 left. Chandler says using 6 at a time means they won't last long, and they might have to go back for more. He decides to stop the ship. Mike asks how he'll explain that after just announcing the vaccine was almost ready. Chandler dismisses his concern, saying they'll just stop for 2 days. If anyone asks why, the answer is no comment. As soon as the ship stops, Quincy starts playing mind games with the cook, asking why the ship has stopped. The cook says he heard they're planning the route to save fuel. Quincy argues that while he may not be a navigator, he knows that to produce a vaccine, they have to go north. There's no need to study the route. When the cook asks if there are other places, Quincy says no and tells him that Dr. Scott has definitely failed. The cook counters that if she failed, she would have come to him for help. Quincy says the cook doesn't know what his captain is really like, calling him a bad person. He tells the cook that to escape the Russians, Chandler nearly wrecked the ship, all because he didn't want to share the strain, which is why they ran out of water. The cook is shocked and stands up to leave. Quincy warns him not to tell anyone, or Chandler might throw him overboard. While throwing the dead monkeys overboard at night, Scott is spotted by 2 on-duty sailors. Chandler visits Scott again. This time, the 6 monkeys have died even faster than before. Chandler complains to Mike, who is also annoyed by the news. In the crew's rec room, the scatterbrain is panicking again, talking about how the disease causes bleeding from every orifice. Burke tells him to shut up his smelly mouth. The scatterbrain says the dead at the base hospital looked horrible and questions if the protective suits even work, pointing out they didn't wear masks when they went to the warehouse. Not content to let it lie, the scatterbrain asks if they all wore their masks properly when they encountered the infected while catching monkeys. Tex tells him to stop talking nonsense, saying they all tested negative upon their return. As the 3 are about to play cards, Lieutenant Green walks in for a drink and suddenly faints. Chandler and Scott rush to the scene. Burke tells the captain he shouldn't be there. Scott dismisses the concern, saying it's impossible for Green to be infected. The ship's doctor then arrives in a full hazmat suit, practically parading from bow to stern, which terrifies the crew. Seeing the doctor's getup, Scott, citing an abundance of caution, says they should all be wearing one. Scott argues that if Green were infected, they would all be dead anyway, and he's just creating a panic. The blood test will take 4 to 6 hours. Burke wants Chandler to lock down the entire ship. Scott strongly objects, saying she tested everyone and they're fine. Burke argues there could be an incubation period. Chandler also starts to lose his cool, asking how she can be sure the virus hasn't mutated and that the Nicaraguan strain isn't more potent. Scott insists that no matter the variation, the core is the same, and this is her field of expertise. Chandler challenges her, pointing out her vaccine has failed so far. Scott says that's a completely separate issue and she's certain Lieutenant Green is not infected. After some thought, Chandler orders a full ship lockdown and the crew springs into action. At that moment, the sidekick girl rushes into the rec room, saying she was in close contact with Green. In the mess hall, the suspicious sailor starts yelling at the Master Chief, saying they saw Dr. Scott secretly throwing things into the sea at night. He questions why her lab needs such heavy security and what she's doing with all those dead monkeys, claiming the virus only broke out on the ship because of her. The Master Chief tells him to shut his smelly mouth, asking who said there was a virus outbreak. As everyone waits in their hazmat suits for the doctor's results, Burke realizes something and asks Scott if she just says there's a problem with the vaccine. Scott has no reply. Just then, the test results come back. Lieutenant Green was bitten by an insect and has dengue fever, which is not contagious. The crisis is averted. Scott tells Chandler she thought he was the one person on the ship who trusted her most, but the last couple of days have shown they're still strangers. Chandler says she's right to think so. He has gambled everything, abandoning his home, killing people, and sacrificing his men for a stranger. Scott corrects him, saying it's not for her but for all of humanity. She says whether he trusts her or not doesn't matter, but he must trust the science, or they'll eventually tie her to a stake and burn her. After last night's events, the cook is completely won over and becomes Quincy's devoted follower. Quincy tells him that Dr. Scott's vaccine experiment has failed and the captain is hiding it from them. When the cook asks if the lockdown was because of the monkeys, Quincy says he doesn't know, but he does know they encountered infected people in Nicaragua. He tells the cook he's too naive and that the higher-ups don't tell them everything. Quincy lays out his analysis. In the beginning, their captain wouldn't let them go ashore, saying the ship was the safest place. But, as the cook knows, the ship's ventilation system connects everything, and with people going ashore every so often, it's only a matter matter of time before someone brings the virus back. He claims Scott's doctorate is fake, that she's just an ignorant woman who needs his help. He tells the cook as a friend that the ship is doomed and advises him to get off as soon as he can. Meanwhile, Mike reports that the ship is now rife with rumors, from the monkeys being poisonous to the ship being broken. He says the crew is about to storm the comms room. The Master Chief arrives, saying there's a huge problem. 16 people have come to him asking to leave the ship. When Mike asks who, the Master Chief says they were all very respectful and not causing trouble. These sailors' terms of service are actually up, and he doesn't know what to tell them. Mike asks if he wants to let them go. The Master Chief says they have to honor their contracts or they'll be no different from the drug lord. Mike says this will look bad, people coming and going as they please. The Master Chief retorts, saying that is the freedom and democracy the captain wants. The cook goes to Quincy again, saying he's submitted his resignation letter. Quincy asks if he included him. The cook says he doesn't think they'd let him go. Quincy argues that without him, they'd be dead if they went ashore. The cook says he didn't dare to ask, in case they wouldn't even let him go. Quincy reassures him, saying his captain is all about liberty, equality, and fraternity. The 16 sailors who want to leave try to convince the scatterbrain to go with them, but the scatterbrain, his mind in a whirl, doesn't agree. Captain Chandler then gathers everyone on the deck for a meeting. He plays the distress calls from around the world, telling them they're not just fighting for themselves, but for all those people. He then has the crew tour the lab, where Dr. Scott explains again how difficult it is to make a vaccine. Chandler announces that from now on, everything will be completely transparent. Whether they can handle it or not, all information will be made public. Finally, Chandler says that those whose service terms are up and who wish to leave should assemble on the deck the next morning. He tells them they have unpaid wages, and he'll give them a small boat and supplies as payment. The next day, Captain Chandler nervously watches the group gathered on the deck. Just then, the suspicious sailor approaches with an American flag. Chandler doesn't know what to make of it. The man says they've decided to extend their service. He asks Chandler to officiate a ceremony for them. The 16 sailors then re-enlist, swearing their allegiance to the nation once more. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Green has recovered from his fever. As for the relationship between the sidekick girl and Green, Chandler doesn't probe too deeply, just gives them a symbolic punishment as a warning to avoid office romances. Chandler then confronts Quincy, accusing him of playing divisive games with him. The scene shifts to a flashback to Norway 6 months earlier. The Russian ship's scientist Soren is discussing a cure for the plague with his mentor. The mentor thinks his method is too radical. Soren says he has already succeeded, having experimented on himself. Hearing this, the mentor is horrified, calls Soren a madman, and flees. Just then, Soren's wife arrives. She says her company is sending her on business trips all over the world and she's leaving immediately. They share a tongue massage and a meal. That's right, Soren is the one who made the virus more lethal. He is patient zero. Dr. Scott's research is still not going well. Only 2 monkeys are left. In the comms room, the sidekick lieutenant discovers a familiar distress signal. Feeling something is not right, he immediately reports it to Chandler and Scott. The signal is from a young girl. The sidekick lieutenant had received her distress call 3 weeks ago. At that time, there were 50 people on her boat. A week later, there were 15. Now, only she is left. Scott believes the girl must be naturally immune to the virus, and finding her could be very useful. Although it could be a trap, Chandler decides to take the risk. Locating the young girl via her radio broadcast is difficult. Chandler takes a chance and opens up their broadcast to contact her, pretending to be the captain of a fishing boat. After getting her coordinates, Chandler ends the call as quickly as possible, but Ruskoff still manages to intercept it. Even though Chandler claimed to be a fishing boat captain, Ruskoff is certain it was him. As Chandler goes to rescue the young girl, Ruskoff also dispatches a speedboat. Unsurprisingly, after they rescue Bertrus, Ruskoff's men arrive. Chandler and Tex lure one of the speedboats away. After eliminating the enemy, their own boat is leaking and about to sink. The two have to abandon ship and jump into the sea. To prevent the Russians from finding them, Chandler had removed the tracking devices from their gear before they left. Now, even the missile destroyer doesn't know their location. The helicopter sent by Mike can't find them. Chandler still has a working radio, but he orders a halt to all rescue operations, telling them to use the cover of darkness to get away. He says it was an honor to serve with them. After the call, Tex asks if he was sending a coded message. Chandler says he meant it literally. Tex is incredulous, asking what the harm would be in a rescue attempt. Chandler explains that if they come looking for them, they risk being exposed. He points to a nearby coral reef, saying they can die a little more slowly over there, and they start swimming. Although Chandler gave the order, Mike and the others don't give up. They send out a helicopter to continuously search the sea. Mike brings in the now compliant Quincy to monitor the Russian ship's communications, since he speaks Russian. Ruskoff's side also intercepts Chandler's final transmission and dispatches a drone to search. The missile destroyer spots the drone and shoots it down with a missile. Tex is happy, but Chandler says this is bad. Ruskoff, on the other hand, is pleased to know they haven't given up on Chandler. Through testing, Scott confirms that the young girl is indeed immune to the virus. Mike's team also figures out the coral reef Chandler mentioned. He immediately sends a helicopter there, but they are a step too late. The helicopter that pulls Chandler from the water is Russian. Chandler has been captured and brought aboard Ruskoff's ship. There, he sees Quincy's wife and child. Ruskoff taunts Chandler for his belief in individual heroism, calling his tendency to do everything himself naive. Chandler responds only by stating his name, rank, and serial number. Ruskoff contacts Mike, offering to trade Chandler and Tex for Dr. Scott and her research. He threatens that while he may not know their exact location, he can use a nuclear missile to vaporize that entire stretch of sea. After studying the young girl, Dr. Scott has a breakthrough. The last monkey finally survives, and the animal trials are a success. Mike is planning a full-scale assault to rescue Chandler. Scott runs in, announcing her vaccine is a success. She says she can leave the data behind for the ship's doctor to handle the rest, as she wants to contribute to Chandler's rescue. Everyone tries to dissuade her, but Scott insists it's time to end this. If they don't deal with Ruskoff, they'll never be safe. He's capable of nuking America, after all. The rescue plan begins. Burke slips a gun into Scott's case. She is sent to the Russian ship. Her life vest contains a tracking device, which the Russians overlook, nor do they find the gun in her case. Scott then conveys the rescue plan and a scalpel to Chandler through a seemingly intimate conversation. Scott meets the Russian scientist Soren, who introduces himself. Scott realizes he is the source of it all, a poisonous man, and she is filled with rage. To test the vaccine's efficacy, Ruskoff has Scott inject one of his men and then puts him in the same room as Soren. Ruskoff tells Chandler he will kill them all after the vaccine is successful, trying to intimidate and persuade him to switch sides. Chandler refuses. At the appointed time on the note, the rescue operation organized by Mike begins. Chandler and Tex use the scalpel to take out their guards. They get out and successfully rendezvous with the boarding party. All of this happens without anyone noticing. Chandler also manages to rescue Quincy's wife and child along the way. Ruskoff finally realizes Chandler's men have boarded. His man is about to sound the alarm, but Ruskoff stops him, saying not to alert them and not to use the radio, as Chandler speaks Russian. He sends his men to capture Scott. Seeing that the time has come and that going to Ruskoff's quarters is likely a death trap, Scott uses the gun from her case to kill Ruskoff's men. She also wants to kill Soren, but he warns that if she breaks the isolation chamber, they'll all die. Just then, Chandler's team arrives. They take Scott and ignore Soren. With everyone recovered, the sailor detonates an explosive charge and Ruskoff's ship loses power. Ruskoff tells his men not to panic, that the rescue team will surely gather at the stern, and orders everyone to go there and wait. Chandler's team indeed heads to the stern. The door leads directly to the aft deck, but Chandler successfully anticipates Ruskoff's anticipation. He reasons that with no alarm and no radio traffic, something is amiss. He orders them to retreat via the ship's side instead. Realizing Chandler didn't fall for the trap, a firefight breaks out. Once everyone is on the deck, Chandler's men begin detonating a series of pre-planted explosives, tearing the Russian ship apart. The usually composed Ruskoff panics. Soren also takes advantage of the chaos to escape from his cabin. As the Russian ship is rocked by continuous explosions, Chandler's team successfully retreats, but before they can celebrate, the brave sailor collapses. He was shot in the abdomen. Back on the missile destroyer, Quincy's family is reunited, crying and hugging, but the brave sailor has died. Lieutenant Green has lost another member of his team. The sailor's sacrifice makes the victory a somber one, but war always requires sacrifice. The scene shifts to Chandler's father, who is no ordinary man. He's a tough, retired Army veteran. He hunts a deer and takes it to a friend, but the friend says he's infected and tells him to leave. The elder Chandler leaves the deer, marks an X on his friend's house as a warning to others. Mrs. Chandler is also resourceful, frequently going into town to scavenge for supplies. Chandler's radio is broken and needs a part, so Mrs. Chandler plans to go to the city to find one. The clinical trials for Dr. Scott's vaccine begin. Chandler wants to participate, but the Master Chief stops him, saying he will represent the leadership class and has already passed Scott's physical. Quincy is grateful to Chandler and is now ready to work wholeheartedly. Many on the ship volunteer for the trial, and 6 are ultimately chosen. Mrs. Chandler goes into town to find the part. She happens to see a warlord outside killing sick people. Terrified, she quickly grabs the part and runs, not noticing a body lying in the corner of the building. 7 hours later, the 6 volunteers on the ship are experiencing various adverse reactions. The sidekick girl is the most severe, even going into shock and convulsing. It takes a great effort to save her. This is not a normal reaction. Quincy and Scott disagree on the cause. The remaining 5 also develop severe adverse reactions: fever, numb hands, rashes, and body weakness. Quincy thinks it's the vaccine. Scott thinks it's something else. Then, everyone starts to have hallucinations. The Master Chief stands up and tries to bolt, and it takes 3 people to restrain him. The scatterbrain looks over and sees his neighbor bleeding from her nose and mouth before she dies. Chandler's father repairs the radio and picks up a broadcast saying patients can receive treatment in Olympia. Quincy tells Chandler the vaccine is useless and these people are infected with the virus. Scott disagrees, saying that the test subject died of a heart attack. Quincy argues it was clearly liver failure, not a heart issue, and suggests using globulin passive immunity therapy. When Chandler asks what that means, Scott explains that Quincy wants to use the antibodies from the young girl's body to treat them, but she says it's not possible. It would require drawing too much blood. The young girl says it's okay, she can do it. Scott insists she is too important to risk, and if their symptoms aren't caused by the virus, her blood would be wasted. Chandler tells her to try it. Then Scott discovers another problem. The sidekick girl is pregnant. Chandler goes to see Lieutenant Green, remarking that he and the sidekick girl were indeed in close contact, even achieving negative distance. He then has Green go visit the sidekick girl. The volunteers' conditions continue to worsen. Chandler tells Mike to make the announcement so that anyone who wants to say their goodbyes can come. Scott is hiding in a corner, crying. Quincy comes to her and admits his mistake, saying she was right. The immunoglobulin had no effect, and the illness is still progressing. In the isolation ward, they've begun palliative care. Suddenly, Scott runs back in. She says their symptoms are not a viral infection, but an autoimmune response. Their immune systems are attacking their own bodies. The monkeys didn't have human genes, so they were fine. After a long-winded explanation, the conclusion is that another injection of the primordial strain from the bird droppings should cure them. After the injection, everyone indeed recovers. Green asks Scott if the baby is okay. Scott says the baby will be born with immunity and congratulates him. Chandler comes to Scott and asks if this means their vaccine is a success. Scott says it's not just a preventative measure, they've accidentally created a therapeutic vaccine. People who are already sick can be cured by it. Chandler is overcome with emotion and weeps. The vaccine clinical trials were a success. The entire crew of the missile destroyer has been vaccinated, with about 50 or 60 doses to spare. Mike says they plan to go to the bioweapons base to mass-produce the vaccine. It's heavily guarded and hard to breach, but they haven't received a response from the base yet. The missile destroyer approaches the U.S. coast and uses a passing satellite to get a look at the bioweapons base. They see a red X on the ground, and the lab has been destroyed. At the same time, Mrs. Chandler falls ill and subsequently infects her family. Chandler's father is driving them to the Olympia Stadium mentioned on the radio for treatment. On the way, they are stopped by a group who tell them Olympia can't help them. The elder Chandler doesn't listen, accelerating and breaking through their roadblock. The group that stopped them is led by the same warlord who was killing patients earlier. An underling asks if they should pursue. The warlord says there's no need. They won't live long anyway. With the bioweapons base fallen and nowhere to go, the sidekick lieutenant receives a broadcast. The broadcast says they are in Baltimore, know about the missile destroyer's mission, and have the equipment they need. They ask them to respond. Chandler decides to reply, but the other party doesn't answer immediately. The elder Chandler, while fixing his car, also hears this broadcast. He tells his daughter-in-law to hold on, that her husband and his crew are still alive. A short while later, the sidekick lieutenant receives a reply from Baltimore and rushes to find Chandler. He says a woman is waiting for Chandler's call. Chandler gets on the radio and introduces himself as the captain of the missile destroyer. The woman introduces herself as the former deputy assistant to the president for national security affairs. She says she knew they went to the Arctic and had a bad feeling about the situation at home, so she pulled some strings to get her daughter assigned to his ship, that daughter being Lieutenant Alicia. Chandler says her daughter has been doing a great job, not at all like someone who paid her way in. He then asks about the president. Alicia's mother says the president had asked her to go underground too, but she felt it wasn't a good idea and didn't go. After that, they all lost contact. Chandler concludes that the government is gone. Alicia's mother confirms this. With the fall of the White House, all rules disappeared. Damaged infrastructure, combined with the deaths and panic from the virus, has thrown the U.S. into chaos. However, she says she has teamed up with law enforcement agencies to create a safe zone and has been waiting for their return. Chandler says her daughter is there and asks if she'd like to speak with her. Meanwhile, the underling reports to the warlord that they've intercepted a message. A Navy ship will be docking in Baltimore for a few hours. When the warlord asks what kind of ship, the underling says he doesn't know, only that they've been in contact with Alicia's mother and she's going to welcome them. The warlord says they will go welcome them too. The time for the meeting arrives. Chandler's team is still fully armed and on high alert. Alicia's mother's side consists of uniformed police officers. After checking the credentials of the police chief, everyone lowers their guard. At this moment, the underling is watching everything through a sniper scope from a distance. The warlord says this just got a lot harder. It's the regular army. Once security is confirmed, Chandler goes ashore to meet the police chief. Just then, another car arrives, and Alicia's mother herself gets out. The underling is shocked to see her. The warlord orders him to take her out immediately, but he can't get a clear shot. The police chief looks nervous and urges everyone into the cars. The underling loses his chance for a headshot. The warlord tells him to ask his informant what their plan is. On the way, Chandler sees the devastation across America, while Alicia's mother's controlled zone is clean and orderly. The woman says she's barely holding things together. The warlord is incredibly ruthless, with more deaths on his hands than the virus. Alicia's mother asks about the vaccine, and Scott says it's incredibly effective. They can now both prevent and cure the disease. The police chief brings some of his men to the missile destroyer to help move equipment. He chats with XO Mike, telling him that the warlord was also a police officer before he betrayed them and became a bloody warlord. Mike asks if there's any news from the area where his wife lives. The police chief says there was a battle there, but not everyone died, and he can take them there after they get off the ship. Quincy then vaccinates the police chief. Alicia's mother has a complete biological lab and a large number of researchers. The underling reports to the warlord that an informant inside Alicia's mother's group says the warship has brought a cure. The warlord says this is bad. If Alicia's mother gets the cure, she'll become unstoppable. He decides they must steal it. Tex is staring at Dr. Scott's sexy body, saying she is cool. Chandler tells him if he thinks she's cool, he should make a move. Tex says he's been trying since he got on the ship, but it's not working. The warlord jams the local radio frequencies, making the signal intermittent. Chandler uses Alicia's mother's high-powered radio to try and contact his father. Tex is about to leave and wants one last chance to see how Scott feels about him. Scott only tells him to take care since he's leaving then. Without much thought, Tex kisses her before turning to leave. Chandler's side calls out for a long time and finally gets a response from his father, who says they are sick and on their way to the Olympia Stadium in Baltimore. Chandler gets his father's location, and Alicia's mother says she can send an escort for him. Chandler sets off with 4 doses of the vaccine. When he arrives, he finds the radio is in the hands of a homeless man. The homeless man says the elder Chandler went to the stadium. Chandler wants to go, but the police stop him. The atmosphere becomes tense. Chandler insists on going, and the police actually draw their guns. Just as one officer is about to strike Chandler, Burke opens fire first. 3 officers are killed, and 1 escapes. The Master Chief is wounded in the arm. Chandler tells Lieutenant Green to take the Master Chief back to the ship and tells Mike to be ready to leave Baltimore as soon as everyone is back. Meanwhile, back at the lab, Dr. Scott discovers a problem. The lab is producing a substance that worsens the illness. When confronted, the researchers look embarrassed. Chandler arrives at the stadium where many patients who heard the broadcast have gathered. He finds his father and children and quickly injects them with the vaccine, but his wife is not there. His father tells him she has passed away. On the missile destroyer, the police chief comes to the bridge, draws his gun, shoots a crew member, and then aims at Mike, ordering him to drop anchor. He tells him to have the crew assemble on the deck. When Mike refuses, the police chief says his men are already on board and he will kill them one by one if he doesn't comply. Quincy tries to resist and is also shot by the police chief. This time, Mike is scared. Scott goes to Alicia's mother and asks what the meaning of producing those poison drugs is. The woman says, to maintain order and civilization, they need elites like them. That mob of riffraff only brings chaos. Their best fate is to be harmlessly disposed of. It turns out that Alicia's mother is the true villain, and the seemingly vicious warlord is actually on the side of the common people. At this point, Chandler also discovers that the stadium is essentially a human slaughterhouse. The bodies of the dead civilians are transported by truckload to a power plant to be burned for electricity, supplying power to Alicia's mother's people. Meanwhile, Alicia tries to escape from her mother's facility but is caught. She tells Scott that she truly didn't know her mother was a monster. Scott tells Alicia's mother that she can't produce the vaccine there anyway. The raw materials are on the ship. Alicia also says the captain will never obey her orders. Alicia's mother scoffs, wondering why it could be so hard to take down one captain. Chandler keeps calling the missile destroyer, but there's no answer. The crew of the missile destroyer has been herded onto the deck. This concludes the first season of the show. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.